Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the meeting is being recorded by the board secretary, and we had an executive session was held on January 27th, 2018 at the board retreat, and it dealt with personnel items. It looks like everybody is here. Okay, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from our January 25th meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from January 25th, 2018? Dr. Sedicum?
Second.
Mr. Kern? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Okay, we're going to move on to our first general public comment session. I would like to take a couple of minutes just to remind everyone about the public comment. Please try to keep your comments to within 3 to 5 minutes and be brief and concise. Remember, too, that the public comment was designed for comments that you have, but not to address any specific questions that would be better suited for the administration, such as if you had a specific question about your child's teacher or something like that. And also, too, please refrain from making any disparaging comments directed at any one individual. You know, if you want to call everybody up here an idiot, that's fine. Just don't call them out by name. Okay. So with that, let's move to our first general public comment. And Madam Secretary, has anybody signed up?
Helen Kondracki.
Please state your name and area of residence.
My name is Helen Kondracki. I live in Haycock Township. For days I have been agonizing over my comments regarding taxes. Just before I left my house, I come here, I received the Quakertown School Board newsletter in regards to the 2018-19 budget woes article. 3 items caught my attention. Number 1, why do we have to limit ourselves tonight, Ms. Swede said. Number 2, in an ideal world, we all would love no tax increase. I don't know why we would limit our options, Ms. Mitchell said. Number 3, the increase of $828,316 in health care cost. Maybe some of my comments, which I had written before receiving the newsletter, will cover some of these items. Let me tell you how my year 2018 started out for me. First, I had to replace the heat pump in my heating system. Then my pipes froze. Then my car broke down. And I was also sick for the first 3 weeks and needed medical attention. This cost me more than $2,000 over my monthly income. To add insult to injury, I learned that 5 board members voted to raise property taxes over the Act 1 cap. They won a 4.2% increase. I have one question for those who voted for the outrageous increase. Have you no empathy? Just where do you comprehend that those of us on fixed income are going to come up with the extra money to pay these obscene taxes? I searched my property many, many times, and I can't find a money tree there. I paid my fair share many times over to educate your kids. For over 40 years, I've been paying taxes to this district with no perceivable benefit. All 4 new members ran on the premise of fiscal responsibility with no tax increases. Ms. Mitchell tells us she has a master's degree in business and many years' experience in balancing budgets. Do you call the increase you voted for fiscal responsibility? I have to balance my budget with what income I have. For your information, I too have a PhD. It's called poor hungry, and deprived. I can't speak for everyone, but I am tired of paying handsomely for something I can't afford and for which I receive no tangible benefit. I recall when the decision was made to close the Milford School, it was said this is about our kids, so it's personal. And there's a lot of things that make the community feel they don't have a voice. It's also personal to me. Your family benefits by the taxes paid to the school district. I do not, but I still have to pay the ransom for my house. There's no nice way to say this, but this constitutes elder abuse. Most of the new members elected to the board are benefiting by the education this district provides. In the 20 years I attended these board meetings, I've seen how board members and parents made more and more demands on the district, but are not willing to put their purse where their mouth is. They act like termites gnawing at the foundation of the solvency of the school district. Board members are elected to serve the whole community, not just certain factions, or should not be guided by self-interest. If you have forgotten, the school district is not the only entity that collects taxes on our properties. In 2017, my Social Security increased 0.3%, which was immediately absorbed in the increase in the cost of Medicare. This year, I received an increase of 2%. However, my Medicare increased over 23%, and my supplemental insurance increased 160%. For those of you who may not be aware, my husband passed away approximately a year and a half ago. I lost his Social Security and I lost his pension. I'm on my own. For those of you who have not been aware, but Social Security benefits average between $15,000 and $16,000 per year. Last year, the president of the Quakertown Community Education Association criticized the board for not using exemptions to Act 1 to increase taxes. When he retires, his weekly, and let me be more specific, his weekly pension will be more than I have to live on for 1 full year. Let's not forget, I had to contribute towards his generous pension and his health care. It's time to stop inflicting anguish, mental pain, fear, and distress in the elderly and robbing us of our basic needs, such as food, shelter, and essential medical care, and above all, taking away our financial stability. That is a clear definition of elder abuse. President Roosevelt once said, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little." My daughter, sitting with me, has a degenerative back disability that not only affects her back, but also her arms and legs. She is in need of medical treatments to alleviate the constant pain she is in. The money I pay for property taxes would go a long way to be able to help her with her medical expenses. My home also needs major repairs, which I can no longer afford to have done. Every day I live with the fear of some major problem coming down on me. I'd like to give members of the board there an article. I have a few articles here that what happens when people can't pay their taxes. So it behooves, for the few copies I have, that it be passed around and let people know what we are up against. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kondracki.
Mrs. Kondracki, thank you so much for your comment. And I just want to let you know, I felt the pain and the anguish that you're going through. So I appreciate sometimes the courage that it can take to get up and express that. I want to assure you, and this is something I feel was very much confused by the article, that we did not vote to raise taxes. I had a lot of concerned citizens who brought that forth, and it's unfortunate because media wants to sell papers and they want clicks, right? So they're going to make a very provocative topic. So I get that, like the title, the headline is what I'm saying. And that headline, some people, I'd say a lot of them, maybe not all, but a lot of them don't go on to read the rest of that article. And I'm not saying that's the case for you. But I just want to provide some clarity in that we did not vote to raise any taxes. We simply voted to allow the possibility for exceptions down the line as an option, in which I am on the Finance Committee, and I can assure you is going to be the very last option, and we are going to take careful time and attention because I've heard stories like yours all too often, and in fact, my father is on disability, and he has a lot of health issues, and I think it's extremely, and I'll try not to go too much down a rat hole here, that people have to worry about things like healthcare costs, that they're not getting enough, money from Social Security, and a lot of people are facing that. The number one cause of bankruptcy actually is healthcare costs, and I think that is, everyone deserves healthcare, and it should be a right. Okay, so I'm not going to go down any further than that. But FDR happens to be my favorite president, and so I really do appreciate all that he stands for and the New Deal that he stood for. And, so I just wanted to assure you I appreciate your feedback, and we will do everything we possibly can to be fiscally responsible, being mindful of not only the citizens who take advantage of education, but all the citizens in this community. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments? Okay. We'll move on to the superintendent's report, sir.
Thank you, sir. First off, I would, something that's not on the agenda, but I would like to catch up from what happened at our last board meeting. We had a 25-year recognition of our employees at 25 years of service. Ms. Sipe, would you please come forward? You know I was going to get you because I knew you were coming back. Laura Sipe is a 8th grade Milford social studies teacher, has taught at Milford and in Strayer now, and has done an awesome job. She volunteers her time in a lot of capacities in clubs and sports, field hockey coach, former field hockey coach, and I'm just very grateful. Had to do it. Next thing I wanted to talk about was after yesterday's snow day. Some of you who don't have children might not have gotten that, but or you just didn't see any Levy buses traveling around on the icy roads in the morning. We had a snow day, so we have to go back to our calendar and look at emergency makeup days. And I went and visited with Ryan Whean, our QCEA president, right before he left today, and we agreed to switch the days that are right before the holiday, the spring break, on the Wednesday the 28th and on the 29th. Wednesday is right now scheduled to be a curriculum day, no student day. The next day is a school makeup day. We want to reverse those. So the school makeup day is on the 28th, and then the curriculum day is on the 29th. So we have agreed to do that, and I'll put that information out unless. Okay, I got some feedback from parents. They're looking at that, and interestingly, the next makeup day is the following Monday, and that would really take away from any kind of break. So we'll look at that one, and but.
Don't we have 2 days to make up yet? Do we not?
We have the next makeup day is February 16th.
Speaking, there are 2 days that we lost to instruction already that we still haven't made up. Am I incorrect on that?
That's the 2 days is February 16th makeup, and now the 28th, Wednesday the 28th.
February 16th one. Okay.
Yeah, that's right before President's Weekend.
And if I never saw anything that said that was going to be a day of class yet.
It was I sent that out.
I just didn't see it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm sure my wife saw it, she knows all that stuff.
Any questions on that?
No, it makes sense.
Thank you very much. Last week, our team up here in OTL, the Office of Teaching and Learning, did a analysis of our NWEA data, and I walked in on the meeting and sat through and listened to the feedback, and I wanted to bring that forward, one to the Education Committee, and I believe that was before Mr. Anderson and others, and I wanted to give the rest of the board members just a brief update and ask Dr. Hoffman to do that.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Harner said, this update is regarding our NWEA testing. We give it 3 times a year, so I'll be talking a little bit more about it, but just so that you know what to expect. This test is something that our district has given for a number of years and is given in approximately 8,000 schools across the country, and I think actually 140 countries is what they tout on their website. So it is a nationally recognized exam, and the data that we receive pretty closely mirrors what we end up seeing on our PSSA exam. So you have that. So tonight we're just going to briefly talk about some background information, give you a little bit of information about what MAP testing is. I do have slides for every building here on their individual PSSA projections or how we think we will do this year on the exam. I'm not going to spend too much time on each one, but it will be uploaded into your executive content so that you can read it. What we know at this point, this data is fresh. It only came out to us last week, so there are still some things we're looking at, but also what next steps we're planning on taking. So some background information for you. The Common Core was adopted in 2009, and it wasn't until 2014 that Quakertown actually updated their maps to match those more rigorous standards. So we were a little late to the game to start with. We only really started updating our curriculum to match just 1 year before the new rigorous PSSA came out in 2015. So we certainly, along with most districts in Pennsylvania, saw a big dip in the 2015 testing, but what we would hope is that since then we would see a positive trajectory, and we are in some areas, but there's some other places where we have identified areas of need. One of those areas of need was math at the elementary level, so we are in our 2nd year of using Eureka Math, and the second area was in our elementary RELA curriculum, which I just brought to you a couple weeks ago for use for next year. If you look at our student performance on previous winter tests, so the NWA given in the fall, the winter, and the spring, the winter data has been an incredibly strong predictor of how our students will perform on the PSSA. As you're going to see in a few minutes, and I share this with the Education Committee, and Dr. Harner and my father-in-law both share a saying, and that saying is that bad news doesn't get better with age. So I am here not sharing positive news, unfortunately, on some of our data, but I do have some ideas on how we can hopefully disrupt that change and make it that this is not a predictor of how we're going to do, and that I come back to you in the summer with much stronger results than what we're seeing here. You'll see on the right-hand side, I just kind of shared with you some information. Right now, the RELA resources we are using in elementary are the 2011 and 2014 editions, so we'll be looking at new resources for that. And in terms of the high school RELA, we are in our 8th year. There was some question about whether it's 8 or 9 because we did a pilot year, but 8th year of Springboard, and we'll be looking at bringing new resources to them in the next 2 years. So there's a little diagram down there, which is not too large. I feel like using my computer and trying to stretch it to make it bigger, but trying to help remember to keep the instructional core at the focus of that. And so what the instructional core really is a triangle that explains that the interplay between the teacher's knowledge and skill, the content and the resources that you provide, and what the student is doing in the classroom, that's what we need to keep our focus on. So the actual tasks, what we're asking our students to do, is where we need to really put our time and effort so that we make sure that that triangle is strong. Each corner of that triangle has to be working in unison. So we just try to keep that in mind as we're moving through this. So what is the MAP test? It's called the Measures of Academic Progress. In this district, we give it to all students in grades 3 through 8 for reading, language usage. In math, we also give it in the spring to our second graders, and that's part of the data we use to determine placement in Math 3+. And we do not give it to students who are taking algebra or geometry. So even if they're in 7th or 8th grade, they have a different curriculum, so we don't give it to them. So I just want to make sure you have that information. Okay, so we'll start here with NIDIG. I just want to explain how you can read these charts, and then, like I said, I'm just kind of going to go through them rather quickly. The way that data is typically compared in Pennsylvania is grade to grade, not cohort to cohort. So what you're looking at here is how our students actually performed in 3rd grade in 2016, 2017, and then how they are projected to perform in 2018. So those would be the 3 different colored bars. If you want to look at the data based on cohort, you could look from left to right by color. So what I mean by that is you could look at how the students did as 3rd graders in RELA, for example, on the blue bar. So they were at 76. The next year as 4th graders, they're now that red bar. So you can see they made a nice increase. This year, they're at 71, so a little bit of a decrease. So it's important to look at it in both ways, because if you look at it on the surface, you could say, okay, last year our 5th graders, they performed 71%, were proficient or advanced, and this year 71% are proficient and advanced. So not the growth that we'd like to see, but performing at the same level. And that's how it will be reported, when the newspapers do their report. However, we also want to look at that cohort data and try to see what happened to the students who were at 87% proficient last year and now 71% proficient advanced this year. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a look. You'll see overall on almost all of these charts, unfortunately, the yellow line is much lower than the blue or the red lines. So I'll just kind of click through them. Sure.
So is this the 2018 projected, is that based on the 3 tests that they're taking so far this year? So their progress, where you expect them to land?
So they actually, NWEA actually did a linkage study where they spent a lot of time going through questions, samples, seeing how students performed, and they've provided that to us. They are actually the ones who determine what the proficiency level is. Mm-hmm. So they're reporting to us this number. So it's not me going through and trying to decide which students I think will be proficient or advanced. It's actually the reported number from the company.
So there's a chance, maybe if we could still close it.
That's my last slide. I'm saving it for the end. I'm ready for it. But yes, this is by no means set in stone. It is every year basically a predictor of how we end up doing within a few percentage points. So it's a strong correlation, but I would like to see us make some changes so that's not the case this year. Quakertown Elementary saw some fairly significant drops, particularly in math. But if you look at their cohort, they were coming from a lower percentage. So while the bar is certainly not where we want it to be, it actually wasn't as drastic a drop as some of our other buildings.
One thing that, if I could add, just one little footnote on Quakertown Elementary. The difference in the poverty index is huge for them compared to, say, Trumbullsville or POF. So you have students coming to the table with at a disadvantage. However, high expectations and quality instruction, all that can overcome a lot of that. But just for the newer board members who don't know the numbers, Quakertown Elementary is over 50% of the students coming with free and reduced meals below the poverty line, whereas the district's average is 34%.
In terms of overall general things that we're recognizing, our RELA scores are holding which is good news. We just don't seem to be making the growth that we'd like to see. So basically, even in areas where our students are performing well achievement-wise, they don't appear to be making a full year's worth of growth in a year's worth of academic time, which is concerning. So certainly we want to have a high number of students being proficient and advanced, but even those advanced students, we want to see them moving along at a pace that's at least 1 year of growth, and so we're having some struggle with that. Richland did have some really positive growth in their RELA curriculum, so I did want to highlight that. They are in their RELA area. They are working really hard, and we do have some classrooms that are actually piloting our new reading program. Now, I don't know that that has anything to do with it yet, because we've just started that, but I think that the connection that those teachers have with their reading specialists is something that could be one of the reasons why we're seeing some growth there. Tehickan Valley is one of those buildings where, even though we're seeing a drop, the drop between cohorts is not as drastic, which is a nice thing to see. It means that we are trying to keep those students on pace. We're now just not in a place where we're moving them forward at an accelerated rate. Chumbarasville does have a place for celebration, so I want to make sure I point that out. Their 5th grade RELA has increased and fairly substantially. So they are performing at the same place that the 5th grade has traditionally, but they're actually coming from a cohort that was lower before. So that's certainly an area of celebration. So our 6th grade center data, you'd have to go back to the buildings, and they don't provide an aggregate of how all 5th grade students did. I did contact them today to see if I could get that for you if anyone's interested, but we don't have cohort data on these slides for these students, but I'm not sure that we necessarily need it. I think it's probably alarming enough that the percentages are where they are, so we'll be working on that. Now, one of the interesting parts about Strayer Middle School is that the data that I included for the red and blue bars is all of our students. So whether they attended Strayer or Milford, they are included in this data, and you can see that the information is pretty consistent with how things have been in the past. So the students are still performing at the same level, even though they're now in a building together. We're not seeing any drastic drops or increases. There really isn't much change, which I think in some regards, of course I'd like to see more positive, is a positive, because there was a lot of concern about whether or not putting all the students in the same building was going to have a detrimental effect on their scores. And based on this limited data, it doesn't appear to be, so I think that's a positive. I think that it's also important to note that for the math section of Strayer, I have made my own assumptions about who will be proficient, because as I said, we don't give the test to any algebra or geometry students. So what I did was basically assume that every student who is in algebra or geometry, because that's an accelerated class, will end up being proficient, and I added that percentage to the percent who actually were proficient. So as an example, of the students who actually took this math test in 8th grade, 7% showed that they could be proficient or advanced. So I believe that the other 43% of our class who is taking an accelerated math class will also be proficient or advanced. So on the bar graph, I used the number 50. I didn't think that using 7 would be an adequate representation, because we were taking, almost half of the class out of the equation, which I don't think is fair to the representation of the teachers in that building. So just so you know, those aren't exact numbers, but that's how I arrived at those numbers. Okay, so what we know. We know that the winter test is a strong predictor, as I already said, and we know that we can pretty much expect these results at the end of the year unless something changes. I'm a big believer that the reason why this test has been a predictor in the past is because we didn't change our instruction. So we gave the test, we got an answer, and then it worked out to be the same. I think we have a really good opportunity right now to look at student-level data, and I know a lot of our teachers are doing that, and principals are working with teachers. We just need to make sure that's happening everywhere, to target instruction and really progress monitor our students on how they are attaining those skills. And as I added on the slide here, we have a chance to to do these things for not only this year, but moving forward. If we can change our current practices, we should be able to see a positive trajectory. So from my perspective in our office, our next steps, and I know this is like, rule 101 of doing PowerPoints, don't put so many words on a slide, but we need to make sure that parents are still receiving copies of their child's reports. So it's been about 2 years that we've been providing very detailed reports to parents after each administration. We want to make sure we keep doing that so that they can see exactly how their child's performing. We also are going to be working with principals and teachers to provide more targeted support based on this data to the classrooms who need it. So we're at a point now where we can see that, maybe a 4th grade math class in a certain building really needs the help. Well, then we're going to put that math specialist there more time so that they can work with them. Also, my office has identified 6 areas of focus need that multiple buildings could benefit from. So we are going to be shortly announcing 6 different professional development sessions that teachers could choose to come to target their instruction to those pieces that we've identified as high need areas. So hopefully, we're hopeful that they'll take advantage of those opportunities. We're also looking at increasing and continuing the work that we've been doing with collaboration. So collaboration between teachers, between our office, principals, the instructional coaches, to really do some job-embedded professional development, to help with planning, to help with differentiation, in-class assessment, so that we can get some positive growth here. And like I said, I want to make sure you're aware that this is happening in some buildings and in some classrooms. We just want to make sure that we get a wider reach so that we can help. We also want to make sure that our standards are actually being taught and taught at the appropriate level of rigor. So we know that we have increased the rigor through the curriculum. What we don't know is whether or not the instructional practices in everyone's classroom has kind of caught up to that. So we have to make sure that we're in classrooms, that we're working with teachers and helping them to gain whatever knowledge they need to make sure that they're teaching those standards. And if it's not a teacher issue, but a classroom issue, a resource issue, that we can get in there and support them with whatever they need. And then lastly, we did purchase a link between Study Island and NWEA, where every child, when they take the NWEA test, it gets linked right into their Study Island, exactly what lessons they should be working on and what they need for growth. And it appears, based on our Study Island usage, that that's not being used. And so we really want to target classrooms where we can help support by having that pathway that's already set up for them with exactly what they need being used in a more meaningful way. So,
Can you
sure.
elaborate for me, Study Island and its purpose?
Sure.
Pretend I don't know what it is.
Okay. Just saying. So Study Island is a web-based tool. It's a pay-for service that originally was created just for basically high-stakes testing preparation. So it was based on all of the standards. You could go through at 3rd grade. You can earn little ribbons that tell you that you've learned all the material. And in theory, if you go through that, when you go to take the test, PSSA or the Keystone, you would have mastered that content. They have since kind of grown into a different company that offers, different, not just for our PSSA, so you can do science, you can do social studies, but typically in our district, we pretty much still use it as focused preparation, but we don't use it only for the test. Teachers are using it and embedding it in their classrooms so that if they're teaching a particular topic, they would assign that topic to their students for extra practice in Study Island. So we've kind of taken it for what it was originally intended for and tried to make it into more of a learning tool than a testing tool. But what happened is NWEA realized that a lot of districts were purchasing this, and so they made this little pathway where they take the data, upload right from NWEA, put it into Study Island, and then it makes an individual pathway for each child. The thing that I really like about that is, and I have my own children, so they use Study Island in their district, and a lot of times, my daughter would come home and she would have 2 sections of Study Island to do, and she would finish them in 3 minutes because she already knew the material. But the whole class was assigned that task. So I really like that what the students are assigned in this pathway is aligned to what they need to work on. It's much more individualized.
So it's at home as well as in class they're using this?
I do believe that most teachers assign it as homework as well as doing it in the classroom. I know in the elementary school, I see it often as a center activity. So the teacher might be working with a small group of students, another group of students might be doing some independent reading, and then the third group is working on the computer. At the middle school, I hear that it's mostly homework, but I would imagine that there's probably some teachers who use it in class as well. And for the high school, we actually purchased their Keystone program, which is what we use as remediation for the students who didn't pass the Keystone exams, which is a report I will present to you maybe next time.
So is Study Island kind of like the program that my son uses in 3rd grade? He comes home and he does.
So that's probably Big Brains. Well, now it's called Imagine Math. So not really. They sort of serve two different purposes, but it's the same type of idea. It's a computer program. You can play games. It does, yep.
Dr. Hoffman, I have a question.
So many questions, yes.
Typically, I mean, I know you guys spend a lot of time with the curriculum, developing it and implementing it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a quote-unquote standard, I'm going to say lag time, that would be typical for this type of a change where, okay, you know, it might take 3 years before you really begin to see the results of the rigor in the curriculum? Is that a fair statement, or can you talk to that a little bit?
It is, sure. So typically 3 years, 2 to 3 years is a good amount of time to determine whether or not something is working. What we are always doing is trying to make changes as we go, which has positives and negatives, right? So it has a positive because we've identified something isn't working, we're going to change it, we're not going to wait 3 years. But then you don't actually know you can't quantify which thing was the thing that made the difference because you're constantly making changes. I think the benefits of making the change immediately far outweighs knowing exactly which thing, triggered the change, but that could be debated, I guess. I think that one of the things that we know is that whenever you do an all-out rollout, so you don't roll up, you just say everybody's in a new program, there's always going to be gaps. And we are certainly finding that with Eureka. I think any of our elementary teachers would tell you that they are teaching much more rigorous lessons. The expectations for students are higher than they have been in some classes before. We hear it a lot in 3rd grade, that the 2nd graders who had a program before Eureka or 1st grade, maybe when they're getting to 3rd grade, they're actually spending a lot of time just teaching them how to be math students that before they can actually get to those skills. So I think certainly there is a time that we need to make these adjustments. But I also know that as most people who know my passion, we can't wait, right? Every year there's a group of students in front of us and we owe them the very best that we can to get those skills in front of them. So that's why I'm trying to get into the classrooms as much as possible to do some of that job embedded right in their professional development on the spot. We'll plan with you, we'll co-teach with you, we'll look at your lessons afterwards, whatever they need to really reach those students.
And your bullet points there, you have ensure standards are being taught with the appropriate level of rigor. Mm-hmm. Do you think that it's being taught Eureka with the appropriate level of rigor?
I think that in some classes, yes. And I mean, all of these statements are generalizations. So I personally have not been in every classroom in this building. So I'm not going to make a statement that says that all teachers are or all teachers aren't. But I know that one of my next steps is to make sure I can say with certainty that every standard that we need to meet is addressed in our curriculum map. I can assure you that. Okay. What I can assure you is that it's happening in every classroom, and so that's why that's one of my next steps.
Are the teachers adequately trained in the curriculum and delivering it?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that, last year I brought to you some data on the number of teachers who participated in our summer work. It was
dismal.
And so I don't think so. I don't think that every teacher, now it's not just because they didn't come. There are certainly teachers who did not come to our training who could have done this.
Do you remember offhand?
I don't. What percentage came to our summer training? Yeah, it was less than 30%. But I would say that there are some teachers who didn't come who have done a lot of preparation on their own. I don't want to make it that the only way they could be prepared is to have come to one of our sessions. But even if you take half of the people who didn't come and say they did it on their own,
Yeah, it's still a big gap.
It's
Well, I was just
still,
looking because, you're on your third bullet point, you bring up professional development sessions offered to teachers
Mm-hmm.
of identified need, and they have no requirement to participate in that.
that's correct. Right. So we will offer them. We've spent a lot of time targeting the areas that we think will have the highest impact. But yes, they would be offered after school.
You can see why, as a board member and as a citizen, that would be something I have an issue with, is that, you're given an assignment to roll out a program and not required to go through the steps to be proficient and applying that, to the education of the students. And you can see why I would have an issue, I think anyone would, where you say, okay, doing your job is voluntary. And so I'm just curious, we have these 9 days that are allocated throughout the course of the year for personal professional development that they're unaccountable. Do we have no avenue to make them accountable, to have objective goals for any of the educators that are not showing proficiency in the execution of the program?
Is that a
That's
generalized-
correct.
I think it's
So,
a generalized statement.
well-
Let me ask a question. Is there anything that was affected by changes that we're doing district-wide that would explain some of these declines that we're seeing, and not simply that we're saying that teachers aren't educated? I don't know that is it.
Well, I certainly didn't mean to imply that our teachers aren't
I'm asking
educated.
like, from a big level view. There's been a lot of changes. There's been shuffling of teachers. There's teachers that are in classrooms that possibly haven't taught that class the year prior. So we've affected a lot of that, guys. So my question is, does that play into these numbers that we're seeing today, as opposed to
It certainly
what we saw a year
can.
ago?
I think that it can. We'd have to look at the teacher level data to determine how many of the teachers are teachers who have moved assignments, or those kind of things. And our team can certainly do that, as can the teachers. But I think as a generalization, the numbers wouldn't be where they were if it wasn't a greater issue. Like, it's not just one or two teachers whose classes are having lower performance. It's across the
that's what I'm
board in
curious
every
about.
grade level, in every building.
Like we were talking about in the retreat, the accountability becomes an issue again. It rears its head here when making professional benchmarks becomes optional, and that's it. And I guess our hands are tied there, but it's frustrating to see.
Maybe I can couch it in a different term, just because that could be taken a little bit confrontational if I was sitting in a teacher's shoes. I always look at it from if something's not working that I'm leading, that's my fault, partly. Like, what's wrong? Are we not providing the training? Are we not providing the opportunity? I don't know what it is, but and that's something I know you're planning to get into. Is there a decent feedback loop for teachers to know that what I'm doing is effective? I mean, I've never been in a class. Well, I've taught Java programming. I mean, I've taught short courses, but I've never taught, in a school, so I don't know. This is a mid-year feedback loop, and I think you said the teachers get to see all this data.
They do. They get individual reports for their students.
Because I would think, as a professional, and if you see graphs of my student body not getting the material or not doing well on something, I'd probably be concerned about it and be looking for support, or I would hope. So I would hope there's some receptive folks to, like I would sit them all in a room and say, all right, math people or RELA people, here's the data. Let's talk. What can we do? I don't know how teachers work, but I know if it was in my business, I'd be like, all right, developers, we're shipping crap out the door. I'm not saying it's crap, but right, we got bugs, we got problems, we got people complaining, we're not meeting. What can we do about this? This is not to be ignored, right? I mean, this has to be solved, and it's a group effort. It's not a union thing. It's not an administration thing. It's not a Dr. Hoffman thing. It's spending a lot of money to educate kids. Where are we failing? What kind of ideas can we bring up from the ground, up? It's not just for you to solve. It's not just for us, certainly not us to solve. So anyway, that's how I would approach it, is what feedback, what's going on.
So thank you for that. I hope that that's the work of the building principal in talking to their teachers to move things forward. I don't have the luxury to be able to pull all the math teachers together in a room to talk to them. It just doesn't, it doesn't work that way. I mean, at our next curriculum day, we could try to do it, but it's kind of like we're already at the PSSA time by then. But I think that the hope is that as our office has worked with building principals on their coaching and feedback of their teachers and what they're seeing in the classroom, in most of the buildings, they have changed the model that they're using for their data team meetings so that they are really looking at real-time data with their teachers and moving through. That the idea would be that this would bring about a sense of urgency. I certainly hope so. I know that when I saw it, I had a real sense of urgency. So my hope is that when teachers looked at their data, they felt the same way. We would love if teachers would look at their data and feel that sense of urgency and reach out for support. That doesn't always happen. So that's why part of the steps are for us actually to be going out and trying to meet with them.
So what do you think the linchpin is? What's priority one for getting your plans going?
I think that it's that fourth bullet down. I think it's just working together as members of my team, the principals, the teachers, and the coaches, so that everyone understands that this is something that we need to move forward with, that each one of us has a piece of the puzzle. So, my office has a lot to offer. Teachers have a lot to offer. They know their students. The principals have a lot to offer in their building. And if we all can work together, we can move some of this forward. I think that's where we have to start. But every person involved has to come to the table ready to move it forward. And we haven't done, to my knowledge, I mean, I've been in the district 8 years, but I haven't been in this position that long. So to my knowledge, there hasn't really been an opportunity for what was the curriculum office and teachers to have a conversation that was two-way. And so I think we really need to be having that, hearing from them, what do you see in your data? Actually asking them, what do you see in your data? What help do you need to move those students forward? We hear a lot from teachers that they don't feel like they have the flexibility to adjust their instruction. So kind of getting past that to explain that they do have the flexibility to adjust their instruction so long as they're teaching the standards. That's a message that, we need to get out there a little bit better.
So, one last question. Is
Sure.
there anything from this board that you would need that we can assist with in order to accomplish that goal? And not that we want to, but is there anything that we should be thinking about doing? Any recommendations that we could discuss of ways that we can help?
Well, I'll say first, I appreciate that offer. I really do. I think that the best support that we've had is your trust when I bring something to the Education Committee, that I'm asking for something, I've done my research on it, and I value it, and I think it's going to work. So that continued support is certainly something that we could benefit from. And I think just as you talk to community members who have concerns about, what their students are doing or aren't doing, as you talk to teachers who have concerns, I feel like I'm pretty approachable. People call me, they have things to say, and I would just ask for your support in having them reach out. If they have a question, instead of having the rumor mill go around, just reach out and ask, and we'll try to solve it. That's probably the best thing I can ask for.
And I appreciate that. I think that one of the things that's, whenever you look at data, declining data is always one of those hitch in the gut type of moments. And so, there's two ways of looking at it. We can either wallow in it and be upset and kicking things when they're down, or we can look at it as an opportunity to grow.
That's right.
And improve. And I think that's really what we need to do is find that. And I hope that the implementation of some of these strategies work. But I would also ask that if you're noticing that they're not, and there's something bigger that the board needs to do from our standpoint, that we're approached beforehand. I think that's and we can.
Thank you.
And not that we can physically go in the classroom and help you out, but maybe provide you some support from an administration high level.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes.
One other technical sort of question. The first bullet always gives me a pause when I think about detailed reports being sent to people that might not have asked for them. Mm-hmm.
I know I say you a lot.
So can I just answer that?
So you ignore the ones that I don't care about. But but my only point is I have no idea what those look like. But if they look like a ream,
It's one page.
Okay. Do they have like red, green?
It does. It's a color document that that shows how your student's progressing against a normed reference number. It does now also feed into the comments on our new report card. So we actually tried to. Now we aren't reporting all those categories on the actual report card. We're attaching their report from Big Brains, and we're attaching the NWA report so that they can have the whole picture of their child without having it in all different kinds of places. So we were thoughtful about that.
Good feedback.
Yes, and the reason why this is normally I don't think for next steps you would say continue something you're already doing, like it's kind of assumed, but we actually did try to collect some data and move forward whether or not these reports were valuable. Teachers actually said that they were valuable in having conversations with parents when they did conferences, or just if a parent had a concern in an IEP meeting, to be able to actually point to the data was helpful, and the parents felt like they could read them, that it was easy to understand. So we're going to move forward with those. Thank you.
If I can have last comment on the topic, unless someone else.
Yeah.
We have actionable data, things where we know our students are, and we can act on it. And that's what we're after, and it's going to be a team effort.
Now, have you gotten any indication from the teaching staff what it would take to improve participation in the curriculum development? I mean, because that seems like it's a key component.
We have, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I
You.
didn't know I was just trying to ask him quietly if he wanted me to answer, but then I.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let her answer.
Okay, you both, how about an answer from each?
So some of the feedback that we have received is not something that we feel comfortable moving forward with. So, for example, one of the pieces of feedback is to do it during the school day or during their contracted time. And from my perception, or from my perspective, I really like to have the teachers in front of the students as much as possible during those days. And we have found that pulling teachers to do work has had different levels of effectiveness. But if you need to pull, let's say, all of the fourth grade teachers for training, pulling all the teachers in fourth grade on one day is not practical. So you wouldn't be able to get subs, you would, those kind of things. So looking at some of the ways that the union has come back with in terms of how it would work really aren't things that we're able to accommodate right now. We did have some brief conversation, Erin Alexa, who's our RELA supervisor, and working with some of the members of the teaching union to determine how we might better roll out the RELA curriculum for people to attend. They suggested that we do them the 2 days after school ends and the 2 days before school starts. We did do that last year, so I'm not certain that that'll be a difference, but if that's what they've asked for, then those are the days that we'll use, certainly.
The most precious resource that we have to make a change is time, and it's all contractual time. So we'll have to. That's the limitation, and we're working on that, and I'm sure we'll come up with a solution. So we know we got a lot of work to do, and we'll work as a team.
Quick question about the professional development. I'm curious, does every district do that different? I'm not that familiar with the unaccountable time that you're referring to. I've heard that before. But is that different district by district? Do we have any best practices from other districts we've explored?
Well, most districts, if you go and check it out and you go online or you ask them for their curriculum, their systems. Most districts don't have a system. They buy a program and they say, here's the textbook, here's the program. Well, textbooks for Pennsylvania, as an example, are designed for the bigger states. And as I see Mitch nodding his head, he understands that, having been a teacher for 30-some years, that they'll build textbooks and programs that are aligned with a particular state, what they're teaching out there. The National Common Core, Pennsylvania Common Core, has helped that out tremendously when it comes to having better resources and programs that are aligned to our state standards. You go to a district. I know I have one of our teachers who's has just became a board member in his own district, home district, and it's exciting. Had a very lengthy conversation. Do they have a curriculum? High-performing district or relatively high-performing district in our neighborhood, they don't have a curriculum. Well, when in 2014 when I got here, we had not adjusted to the Common Core yet, and we definitely didn't have curriculum maps. We bought programs. We bought things off the shelf, make a decision, pilot a couple, and all that. First, you got to build your maps, your curriculum maps, and then find programs that fit those maps so we have instruction. Then you got to get instruction aligned to those maps. And that linkage right now is probably the weakest link between instruction and the maps. Because of you're changing the paradigm of the teacher's day and what they do. So then the limitation of getting teachers to that and our team to that point is getting them to change what they're doing. And we don't have a lot of the time to do that. Okay. But we're going to get it done. Thank you, sir. That ends the superintendent's report.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Hoffman. That was a very good presentation. Okay, we would normally at this point have a student representative report, but from what I understand, our student representative was enjoying the Eagles parade today.
As were all the high school students.
Mark that as excused.
The entire senior class was missing today. I guarantee that.
All righty, we'll move on to the board committee reports, and we'll start with the Education Curriculum Committee. Mr. Anderson.
All right, well, the first thing we did was we started looking at a new textbook for dance, history of dance. It seemed pretty interesting. About French, they're going to offer it, but they're not sure if it will fly because there may not be enough interest in it. And it's going to be offered initially through the middle school if it actually does fly. And we also talked about a panorama survey about school climate, and that were the main things. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Next is the Facilities Committee. Ms. Mitchell.
What's going on? So we actually canceled the last Facilities Committee. However, I believe we were going to take time for any updates from the administration.
We will have all the items from the committee from last week. We'll have that on the agenda and roll right through them.
Sounds good. Okay, we'll have nothing else to report.
Okay, next is the Neidig Elementary School renovation planning update. Mr. Harper.
This is our Facilities Committee late to the game, and I think a lot of the members had the flu, and that's why we canceled, and I got that shortly after you guys canceled too, so this is my first day back to work. So, Neidig Elementary renovation. So we've had 3 meetings so far, and these are just the updates of that. Just go through them quickly. I believe the meeting minutes are posted in the board docs. The first meeting was our kickoff meeting. It was really to define the project team and the meeting schedule. It was the administration that's on the team that's going to meet on a bi-weekly basis. It's the principal, select administrators, or architect and engineer. So they're going to be meeting regularly, and we also are going to have inclusion of key stakeholders for their input at different periods of that process. We reviewed a broad scope of the project, like capacity, additions that'll be needed, program needs, so it includes parity that we talked about through the different processes of getting to this point, and also class sizes by grade and how that's going to develop as we go through this planning process. We talked about constraints. The property is actually located in 2 municipalities. Part of the parcels there, one is Quakertown Borough, the other is in Richland Township, so that's a constraint that we have to work with as well. And we talked a little bit about parking, pickup, drop-off issues. In our second meeting, we talked about some endangered species. You probably heard about the bog turtle habitat. So that came up, and that was part of the planning with this, that as the development of the project goes along, you have to see if there's any endangered species habitats before you can do any kind of construction. We had to hire a consultant to go out and do a study, and results of that came out in the third meeting. So we also looked at a preliminary sketch as part of that meeting as well. Schrader Group came up with a sketch so that we could see what are their thoughts based on the things that we told them we wanted to see in the building, parking and different concepts that they had there. It was a first look for us. We talked about some design. So the popular thing was looking at POF and Trumbowersville as they had pods. That seemed to be very good working for the schools and a model for building in the future. So we talked about that in small group instruction areas. The scope of the project being that we're going to increase the capacity to 600 students from 400. And relieve some parent drop-off issues that we have right now. So the parent drop-off actually backs up into the public. It creates traffic issues, blocks driveways and things. Mr. Godshock can attest to that they have regular complaints and issues with that. And just parking in general and a need for larger spaces. Again, parity and capacity issues there for cafeteria and gym. In our last meeting, number 3, confirmed that there are no bog turtle habitats on the space, so we're clear from that. But there also was another endangered species for plants we need to look into to make sure that there's nothing else there that we're going to disturb and cause an issue with. In that meeting, we took a more detailed look at parking and drop-off routes. Actually consider looking at entering the rear of the school from Erie instead of from Penrose on the front, so we could have a potential student drop-off in the back of the school. I believe we could load about 30 or 40 cars on site if that works out that way. And that was another thing that we're looking into. Briefly touched on building systems. Our engineers going to present pros and cons of various HVAC, lighting, electrical, network, technology. All those things were discussed. And the last thing we talked about, so Schrader Group does these elementary school construction projects across the state and the country, and we asked them, what are other school districts doing? How do we come to be the latest and greatest of what we're doing? We want to make sure we're on track with the most modern technology and things. So they showed us a few plans of other schools that they did, and they suggested we go and visit some in the area that they've done. So on the 15th, we're actually setting up a tour for up to 9 people to go visit Phoenixville, one of their elementary schools that Schrader did, and Bristol Township. We're going to visit one of theirs and see how it works. So we can actually talk to the people that are in those spaces, see how it works, get to ask them pros and cons, what did they like, and it'll be a good education experience for us. So that's the renovation update, unless there's any questions on that. Okay, so the next topic is Milford and Tehickan Valley disposition. So we talked about those buildings and being vacant, and our recommendation is that we should do demolition of those buildings. So we had some initial numbers based on the appraisals, what's a demolition cost, and there were just generic numbers. So what I did, I went and got a hold of a few demolition contractors and asked them to give us prices. We've only got one back so far from Haynes and Kibblehouse, so we have some good budget numbers to work with, some real-world numbers. So Milford Middle School, they estimated to be $582,000 to demolish the building, the foundation. So what you'd be left with is the building footprint. It would be no concrete, no structure. It would be filled with dirt, seeded, straw, and left alone. That would be the finished product. Same for Tehickan Valley, $312,000 was their estimate. Those numbers are high numbers to think about, but those are the numbers we think we would expect to see. And we're actually looking for a motion from the board to actually advertise RFPs so we can go out and bid these processes. It doesn't commit you to anything except advertising cost. We need to go through the bid process, being the cost of those projects, so we can go out, get multiple bids, bring in the lowest responsible bidder, and we bring that back to you for a decision. Do you want to move forward or not at that point? Questions about that?
So the recommendation is to go ahead with the demolition?
I think based on that's probably better answered by someone else up here because of the legislation potential.
There's 2 factors here. One, the one that I brought to the facilities committee first off was don't recall the Senate bill or the House bill that will most likely come forward again this spring on charter school reform, and If you recall, on page 37, 38, they talk about charter schools having the first right of refusal. Having a charter school in our backyard, in our front yard, would be not only impact us greatly, it would impact districts with 11, 12 districts, depending upon the Hicken Valley or Milford, because of the 10-mile radius just for transportation. They could come from further away, but just for the 10-mile transportation thing. The other thing is that we may have buyers. I know the Facilities Committee's recommendation is to retain the Milford property for future use, and I think that's a great, I support that. It's a strategic asset for moving forward in the future. Hicken Valley, however, is landlocked. You can't expand. It's not a large enough footprint to rebuild correctly on that lot.
Ballpark we're expected to get for that is 1.4.
After it was, Ms. Edwards, when a 1.7 was the
prior to the demolition.
Prior to demolition, so it's about 1.3, 1.4 million dollars we could sell it for approximately.
No, we don't know what's going to happen with that legislation until it happens, and this is near $1 million coming out of a budget that's 3 and change behind to start with, and what I'm going to ask the other board members to deliberate, because we don't have to pull the gun on using the charter school defense unless we need to. And what I'm going to ask the rest of the board to consider is that we actively try to sell to Hicken Valley and make the demolition contingent on the sale, so you get a buyer and say, okay, now we'll demolish it, so we don't have to lay out that cash until we know that it's a sales pending, and then from the proceeds from that, use that to do the demolition for Milford, so we don't have to dip into fund balance or cash now. And one of the other people were asking about, a couple people mentioned, liability with vandalism, and the liability insurance is relatively inexpensive, and if a building's going to be demolished, how pressing is the vandalism of it prior to it happening. So the way I'd like to, if possible, to see it go in a perfect world is that the sale for Hicken happens with a pending sale. If it's contingent upon demolition, who knows, that your buyer might want the building, and so I would ask that we think in the mindset where the proceeds for the demolishment of the Milford building is going to come out of those proceeds versus our finance committee budget, if possible.
I'd also want to make sure that, before Hicken Valley is knocked down, someone's going to go through there and buy all the stuff they can buy before we trash it, right?
It's pretty limited. Even with Milford, we've gone through, and the furniture, it's nominal value. The things inside of it, we've kind of repurposed and used things already, but the existing features of the building don't have that much value, to be honest.
Hicken Valley is the one that I think we can all agree that we can care less if that property comes or goes. I don't want to speak for everybody. But before they go in there and knock down the building, if there's copper, if there's these things that people pay money for, we need to be diligent and make sure that the committee maximizes on the amount of money that the school district can make off that property.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, one more thing. Does Hicken Valley have a basement?
Partial. There's 3 basement areas, actually. There's a large storage area in the newer wing, and there's a small boiler room, and there's a section under the kitchen.
Because clearly there's exclusions in here, which you didn't point out. It's not the complete cost of demolition.
Right. There are permits and things like that, correct.
Is our staff prepared to fill that ourselves?
It would all be part of the demo. It would be all revealed in the bid. I mean, there's other options. If you can see the quote that's posted in the content. So there's options where you could leave the slab. There's a lot of options that could be taken here to reduce cost. But like you said, there's other things, permitting and other things that need to be specifically addressed in the bid. Yes.
Now specifically, what you're asking us for is permission to go get an RFP?
Correct.
Is that something that we need to make a motion on, Mr. Garden?
Well, if I may say, given what you just said in your suggestion, I think the first set would be that you, for Tehaken Valley, that you to put out an advertisement if we're going to sell the property.
Yeah, well, yeah, because we need to get moving on it.
And then for the other one is, let's sit tight. Let's just sit tight. Your intent is to demolish Milford, but we sit tight until we see, what comes first.
Yeah, there's nothing pressing.
There's nothing pressing, but we have had vandalism there, as I shared with you, and it's very sad to what some people are doing.
But that aside, pulling a $600,000 trigger is not, when we don't need to, is not the most prudent course of action from the Finance Committee. So
and I agree. And just for the community's understanding is that there are folks that are breaking into Milford and destroying things like bathrooms and pulling fire pins on fire hydrants, and it's a really bad display of sort of the best of Quakertown. I have to be honest; it was ugly to look at, and I don't care if it's an abandoned building. Nonetheless, it's something that I think people have to understand as to what's going on, and so.
Isn't there a term for that, Mr. Garden? Attractive menace?
Yeah.
Attractive nuisance, I think it's called.
Okay.
Attractive nuisances.
Okay, I knew there's a lower term. Well, because it's just irresistible to some people, I guess. So
there'll be only one motion, is that you allow us to advertise for sale pending, and then with the demolition piece in
all
there.
right, how would I word that, Mr. Garden?
The appropriate motion would be to authorize the administration to take the necessary steps in accordance with the school code to offer Tehaken Valley for sale.
Can Mr. President bring that motion forward? Is that okay now?
The board can choose to undertake it now if you choose to.
Okay.
Okay. I make the motion. I'd like to make the motion that we authorize the administration to begin the proceeding of the sale of the Tehaken Valley School under the language that Mr. Garden previously framed for us.
Okay, and Mr. Jackson seconded it. Discussion?
I think it's a great idea.
You know my vote. Just one quick question, then. This would, in effect, remove the need to vote on an RFP then tonight, correct?
Yeah, because I think the theory being that if you find a buyer
Yes.
who does not necessarily want to demolish the entire building, then you might be able to save the demolition cost.
Okay, now the other question is, what does that do for not getting an RFP for Milford? Do we want to have Kelly ready to pull the trigger, or do we want to wait for that as well?
That's a board decision.
My concern on that is we're sending an RFP to try and sell the building. That doesn't mean it's going to happen now or quickly. And I don't like the idea of Milford, given the fact of what's occurred recently, sitting there for any length of time. Frankly, we know Tehaken Valley has some tangible value, and we expect to sell it at some point. But I think Milford's got to come down with all due speed.
If I may, sir, I think we need to play out the spring, at least the springtime, the legislative session, and then seeing what happens in the state capitol, what's going to drive the actual train there. And as Dr. Sedicum had talked about, you're going to be spending $600,000 when you really didn't. One, we can't afford that right now. It would come out of our fund balance.
I mean, if the district is comfortable having it there in what has happened recently and the possibility of it happening again, then, take all due diligence to prevent it, but at the same time, just saying.
Yes, sir.
So, but there's no harm in getting RFPs, right?
No.
Well, other than you're wasting people's time, so I would vote.
Well, no, but what I'm thinking is, I mean,
We're not intending to do it anytime soon. Why put people through the false hope of getting a bid? So as a fellow business person, I'd say don't go out for an RFP.
Which is why I asked the question that I did.
There's a nominal cost too. I don't know what it costs Alice to just go through the whole process. It's going to cost you $2,000, $3,000, maybe $10,000. just to go through the paperwork and the advertising.
The bid package, which
Well,
may take
what's the
time.
what's the turnaround time? Like when you put out an RFP for a project like that, what's the turnaround time?
It's a 3-week advertisement, and from that point, opening the bids the following week, about a month. To
Okay.
develop it like they were talking about, that could take a month or so.
Okay,
Come up with the bid specifications.
Yeah, so I would be inclined to have one ready, because the thing is, in a business, especially project-oriented one, you line them up into the future. You know, this year's project, 6 months from now, a year from now. So if we have a RFP that has a window of 90-day guarantee, 180-day guarantee, 365, as long as they know going in, the mindset of the administration, having ducks in a row is never a bad thing.
No, and I don't disagree. I think my only question was, I think this number was much higher than was given in the past. And so it would be really nice to know better numbers.
That's why we want an RFP now.
Well, I thought we were talking about not doing it. That's why I was arguing for an RFP.
I'm saying that if it's going to take a couple months before we're even brought back a decision to the board, that's a lag time that we might not want to be faced with down the road. So being ready to say, yep, that RFP, let's enact it now, then they can get right to work, because there'll be a lag time from the time we say go to before guys can show up on the job.
Then we're in agreement. That's what I was saying. I didn't want to wait on the RFP because these numbers are much.
Okay, so now the next motion.
Thousands of dollars more than we talked
Well,
about.
the demolition.
The demolition then.
The demolition won't happen. Yeah, the demolition
So
won't.
when are you supposed to bid for something that may or may not ever happen? And how long is my bid supposed to be good for? I'm just gonna, right?
Well,
It's just ridiculous.
bids are only good for 60 days.
Exactly. It's a ridiculous request to make of a business.
I mean,
You put a date in there.
Well, no, Dr. Sedekin was
We're gonna
simply,
demolish it in 60 days. Otherwise, don't go put somebody through the ringer to make a stupid bid.
but Dr. Sedekin, I thought, was just asking that we prepare the documents and don't let it out to bid. I'm confessing, were you?
I want to know how much of the groundwork we are capable of doing now to expedite the process when the time comes.
It seems to me, and I'm not speaking for the administration or the board, but you can use this time to develop your specifications and your bid documents, so when you make a decision, you can then advertise the bid, and you'll be able to open bids in 30 days.
Okay.
So that you'll make up the preparation time, so you'll have a shorter window if you choose to go that way.
Okay, so if we have that going on, that'll take us more or less into the 2 to 4 month go to settlement from the time we have an offer on the building for that time. So I would recommend that we consider lining that component up, and actually when we get a contract on Tecan Valley, starting the RFP project for getting that going. So as soon as we go to settlement, we can begin and do sequence the demolition of Milford, and that's prepared. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we have on the agenda tonight, under the fiscal consent agenda, we're discussing having the RFP done. We can change that motion to simply begin to prepare the RFP. We can instruct.
That makes the most sense, given that, like, as Mr. Kern said, if there is a 60-day window, then it would be, because then you have to go through the whole process again after the 60 days.
Yes.
So that would be, there would be no point in that redundancy.
The other factor is that sometimes bidders won't bid more than once. If you don't approve a bid the first time,
Okay,
they don't
right.
want to go through the process again.
Right,
So
and we don't need
if you're serious, you shouldn't put it out to bid.
and we don't need a motion to start preparing, right?
You could just instruct Mr.
Okay.
Harper to begin that process.
Are we okay as a board so duly instructing him to?
I personally tend to be more just in time. Like, if we ask you now, if we ask you 6 months when we actually, so that's my only concern, is there's a lot of things that you can choose to do, and if we direct them to do something now that's going to sit dusty for 6 months, in my mind, that's I would rather do it just in time. That's my personal approach to these sorts of things.
I don't know, as
maybe
far as what we're talking about in the way of a demolition and just getting the RFP together the way you want it to, I wouldn't see that would change drastically from now to 6 months from now, even a year from now. Would that?
The only point is,
No.
there's a risk that we never asked for it, and it's a risk that you're wasting time, that's all. Versus, what's the rush? Why do you have to do it? My only point is, it's not the most burning issue in front of the board is for Kelly Harper to create an RFP. for some demolition that may happen sometime in the future, right? I mean, it's just like.
Look, it's getting childish. What we're asking for, what I was hoping for was from a financial standpoint to know what real numbers we're going to be talking about in a financial budget in which we're going to be growing down here in a couple months. This is much higher than we projected. If it comes to a point where we need to pull the trigger, I would like to know what that number is going to look like. Unfortunately, I agree, just in time's great, but sometimes a little preparation, and so that we're not scrambling at the 23rd hour.
Why isn't this preparation? Why isn't this the number? Because you don't like it.
Well, the numbers that were given to the Finance Committee just a month ago were like $300,000 to tear it down. So it was just a pick of the air, I guess, right?
Are you referring to Beacon Valley or Milford? Because there's two different numbers.
Milford, I think it was like $350 to tear the building down or something.
Right, they were both based on
They were
appraisals, generic
astronomically
numbers.
lower than what we're talking about here. So it would give us just a better understanding of the bigger picture. And I don't want to waste anybody's time. I'm not asking to waste anybody's
There's a
time.
nuance. The other numbers were based on the appraisal value and just random,
Right, square footage.
Yeah.
This is
All
a
right.
real, this is a real.
All right, so
ballpark.
ballpark, we're looking around 600 grand-ish, at the end of the day, and so we'll hit that project later. So if you don't mind doing whatever you feel is appropriate to be ready for whenever the sale of Tahican Valley becomes imminent, I think that would be
I think that's a
appropriate.
reasonable request.
We'll develop the documents, and when you're ready, we'll be ready to put them out.
Okay,
Thank you. Now, we still have a motion that is up.
Quick, yes, so I'm sorry to belabor the point. I want to ask about the motion on the table, which is the sale.
Yes.
Correct? I'm not sure if this is a question that can be answered, but my concern is that if we enter into an agreement, we're not going to be done with Tahican Valley until, I'm not sure when. It's not going to be the last day of school. Tahican Valley and the property will belong to us for some length of time thereafter. Yet, are we talking about entering into an agreement of sale at this time to sell it to some party that we're both going to agree to at a future date? And if the legislature does in fact come through with a bill that allows first right of refusal to a charter school, will that contract be invalidated because it hasn't been executed yet?
Well, a couple things. The contract portion is finding the buyer. And finding a buyer that's going to enter into terms that are going to meet the district's needs. If you enter into an agreement that will be subject to contingencies, obviously as a buyer, you're going to do all your due diligence. Are there wetlands? Is there environmental issues? And lastly, you're going to need court approval to go to closing. But if there's an agreement in place, the legislation can't undo an existing agreement. The typical time here is finding the right buyer at the right price with the right terms. And there's no other, that's the toughest part of this process.
The trick is the building can't be for sale if that legislation passes.
Without saying it publicly, the answer is correct. It's got to be either under agreement or not being sold at this moment, if that legislation.
And there has been some interest, yes, Dr. Hunter?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So we have a motion on the floor to proceed with advertising the sale of Tahican Valley Elementary School. We have a motion and a second. We've had the discussion, so it's time to vote.
Would it be the property of Tahican Valley, not the building?
No, it's.
Everything is.
Everything. Property, building, everything. If I misspoke, I'm sorry.
The buyer may decide they want to keep the building.
I don't think that's on the table for us.
Oh, well, then, you need to decide then to spend the demolition money.
That's the motion. That's the motion on the table.
Is to sell with the demolition, you're saying?
No, well, to sell under the contingencies
To
of the buyer.
advertise.
They get.
Well,
I just thought there was a contingency.
the motion might be offered for sale, and then you can structure whether it's with or without the demolition, depending upon the interest you receive.
Correct.
When a buyer comes up, we have to vote on whether to accept their offer and whatever goes with it, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so basically all we're authorizing the board or the administration to do now is go through the appropriate advertising and the legal hoops to begin the sale process. Tahican Valley, everything on there is for sale. And then a buyer comes and says, hey, we got an offer, then we as a board say, okay, we accept that and the contingencies, then a judge approves it, and then we're cleared to go to settlement. That's the sequence of events.
not that easy, but.
But yeah, yes, right, okay.
Never
So-
that easy.
So we're voting to start that process. And the motion is worded correctly to do so?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries and passes unanimously. Okay.
Next thing.
Next item is a Trumbowersville roof. Just the recap of that. So we have a shingle roof on this building. We've had multiple leaks. They're getting worse. We had a consultant come out. They believe that the substructure of the roof wasn't installed correctly. And during the period since the last time we discussed it, I've been looking through my office, the business office has been looking through archives here. We're struggling to come up with good data to say what was construction supposed to be. Found out that the building was originally specified for a metal roof, and some point in time it was changed to a shingle roof. And it's hard to find out exactly why that happened. So we've gathered all the documents between my office and here. Even Mr. Achmanowitz came for a tour. He's seen our storage room. It's a shower room converted to a storage area. So we're really going through our records, trying to clean things up, get them into a better state of what we have and where it is. So all the documents that we did find, we sent to Mr. Garton's office for review. He just got them earlier this week. So I believe they haven't had time to review them, but
About an inch and a half of documents, so I'll get through it this week or early next week, and we'll have an answer for you before your next meeting.
Did you, Mr. Harper, did you find anything in the way of any type of a warranty or anything like that?
yeah, so there is a warranty for the shingles, but again, it's the substructure that's what is believed to be failed.
Right.
And our consultant has said they need $1,700 to do a forensic study, tear off a 10 by 10 section of the roof so they can see what was actually construction under it to see if that is in fact what's causing the shingles to fail. The shingles aren't expensive. We could get shingles for it, and this is going on a 20-year-old roof, and it's a 30-year warranty, I believe, for the shingles. So it should have another 10 years of life, but it's failing prematurely. That's what we're trying to have Mr. Garton identify for us. Is there something that wasn't done properly? Is there some other warranty we're not aware of? And that's what we're waiting for an answer for.
Okay.
Sometimes there are what's called roof processes where the manufacturer actually, as part of the warranty, chooses the installer and covers all aspects of it. So we need to find that out. And frankly, I think you ought to spend the $1,700 to do the forensic analysis because you need to find out where the deficiency is. That's up to the board.
So the substructure was built by the same company, possibly that did shingles.
So Penn Builders was the general contractor. They hire a subcontractor to do roofing, which was Allied Roofing in, I believe, Hatfield, Hatboro. There's no one there at that by that name anymore. Penn Builders is certainly in business. I reached out to them to see if they have archives from 20 years ago. They're looking at data for us. They haven't come forward with anything helpful at this point. So we're using what we have to try to get leadway to maybe have some restitution for this.
We'll have Mr. Garton's response before the next meeting. I'll provide that to you all. But for Ms. Mitchell, I would recommend that we discuss at the next facilities meeting and then bring a recommendation to the board about expenditures of to go do the work that Mr. Garton talked about. Let's put it all together, package it, and bring it back to the board.
And I'd just like to say, for the public, the bottom line is the roof at Trumbowersville has failed. It's leaking tremendously, and the ask of us is about close to $750,000 to replace the entire roof over there. So it went through the facilities committee. The facilities committee said, is asking, is there any warranty or any legal action that we could do, as this is a relatively newer structure. And so to say that we're disappointed that we're at this point is an understatement. And so we're exploring all our options so that we can try to preserve at least some of the cash that we're going to outlay as a community for this building. So.
Are we going to replace it with shingles or metal?
So I did ask those questions. To do metal is substantially more. We're already at the $700,000 estimate just to do a shingle replacement. I think it was close to $2 million to do metal. Just because the way that the roof's structured with all the fine cuts is a lot more time consuming to put metal back in there.
I guess we're going with shingles.
I guess we're going with shingles.
But that's probably why
Yeah.
Right, I'm sure there was money savings there. It was probably the board at that time said, how can we save money in this project? That was offered up, but I can't find the documentation on that.
Okay. All righty.
So, next is the a high school update. And so the rear sports complex, it's kind of come to a standstill right now because of weather. Obviously, the ice and the cold over the last 2 months has slowed down so the carpet's basically down. Some of the asphalt's down, bleachers are up. You'll see some field goals up, one of which is slightly crooked at the moment. So the next part of the process is finishing the turf, doing the infill, some paving. Paving plants aren't open until it's warmer, and they can do it at that time. There's a lot of grading remaining. They did a lot of rough grading of the grass fields, but that's all left at a point that's not really manageable in this weather. So once the weather gets a little bit warmer, they'll continue to work on that. Expected completion of the project is April, May. So we'll have full use of the synthetic turf field. The grass fields will be off limits for a year so that the turf can be established there. Next item is the high school C-wing roof leak. You got an email about that. There's a lot of questions have gone around. We're actively having roof leaks in that area of the building. And more recently, it's become more severe, whether that's because of more precipitation or whatnot, or the leaks got worse. The hallways lined with buckets have become a slippery area. I know the administration's actually closed that hallway off to a certain extent. I believe today it wasn't even accessible just because we don't want students falling and getting hurt in that area. Just wanted to bring it to the attention of everyone so you're aware of it. The short version of the story is the project called for an overlay of the existing roof, not a total roof replacement. And when they got to a point, they saw that the pitch wasn't substantial enough for drainage. They did a change order. They added some pitch to it and then covered the membrane. Once the membrane was done, the solar panel people came in and they put panels on top of it. So that kind of makes it a little more difficult to troubleshoot leakage. But the roofer's been in, and actually today both the roofer and the solar contractor were in troubleshooting, trying to find leaks. But there was a lot of ice on the roof, so they had trouble even at this point. So they are actively trying to solve it, but it's a problem they're dealing with on a regular basis, which is difficult. And if you haven't heard about it, I'd be surprised because it's an inconvenience and makes a new area of a brand new building look bad.
Are they each of them blaming each other so far?
To a degree, there's finger pointing that the roofer initially found some problems with the roof. They corrected it, and then they said some of the areas we're seeing punctures and problems. We believe the solar people did it. So they didn't want to keep doing work for free. At the same time, the solar people said, well, we didn't really do this. They're blaming us for things that never happened. So it's gone back and forth. But I think we're getting closer. Today, they believe they found a roof drain issue. That's slated to get repaired once it's able to be repaired in a little bit warmer weather. We're still living with the leakage situation.
Okay.
Questions about that?
No, but I think it's, an understatement to say again, how many millions did this board spend on that project? And to be at this point is extremely difficult to swallow. So we need to make sure that, we're taking the same actions that we would take if somebody made a mistake.
Understood. Yep, that's what we're doing. We're trying.
It's not, the cost isn't burdened by this community.
Understood, yeah.
I presume that this roof is under warranty?
Correct.
Still? Okay.
So once the thing that's in question is, was it a contractor that caused damage to the roof, and is that the source of the leaks? So it's gone back and forth, but to be honest, Skepton is putting more effort into solving the issue right now. And just like with Trumbowersville, they didn't install the roof, they hired a contractor, and it's one of those, there's a lot of moving parts in it, but we're left holding the bag of the problem and seeing it on a daily basis.
They're responsible, though, at the end of the day, right?
Well, that's correct.
Get it fixed before they go out of business.
Very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, stay tuned for that one. A couple more things. So, high school HVAC issues. So, a lot of the no heat issues we had, and it was problematic for a while. I think we're down to very limited, if any, no heat issues. There's a few remaining issues of sensor calibration, some valves that aren't fully shutting off. We're getting closer to the end of the HVAC issues. I doubt you're hearing much of them. There's still a few on occasion, but it is getting better and close to resolution there.
Our exchange student that lives with us has had no heat in her chemistry class all year. And we're now in February in a high school that was renovated. I'm just throwing that out there. That should not have happened.
You know that.
If I were representing, I would be suing the HVAC company that installed this. This is a new building, and that should not have happened.
I'll say that I look at the HVAC on a daily basis. I haven't the earlier part of this week being in bed, but most part I am looking at temperatures on a daily basis. I can see it from my desk. There is one science room, and it probably is a chemistry room, that they've had some intermittent problems.
They've been in coats. They've been in coats all year. They've been wearing coats all winter.
I mean, they didn't turn up the Bunsen burners?
I don't know, but no kid should be in a coat in chemistry class. It might be. It's. I'll check the name.
Stonebeck, yes.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
I'll confirm and visit there tomorrow.
He's had troubles for 2 years, 2 or 3 years, and because that's how long we've had that wing, correct? 2 years.
Yes, this is the second year of operation there.
And I've heard it from him when I'm walking around, and then I sent him an email, and I probably could pull it up to date, ask him if he had any more issues. So he has not. He and I have had many exchanges. So, and you don't know about that, correct?
No.
And so one of the things we have going on is people don't have faith in the work order process because of history or whatever. And what I normally do when I walk around, I text them right away and said, what's going on in this particular room? And is there a work order? And the answer, yes or no. Then we go from there. So we'll jump on it. So get with Barry in the morning.
Okay, so remaining items, just for this is facility committee informational items. Quakertown Elementary School boilers, we were given a temporary use from the L&I department for the boilers. They're so old, they're problematic, they're requiring us to spend about $15,000 to make them operational for the following heating season.
Annually or monthly?
What's that?
Annually or monthly?
Oh, this is a one-time thing. We've got a quote to satisfy the inspector. It's $15,000. What that is opening up the boilers, taking off all the inspection plugs, chemically cleaning the inside of the boiler and the fire side as well. He wasn't satisfied with how the conditions of the boilers. It's really an age thing, but he wants plugs taken off the boiler that probably haven't been taken off in 30 years. There's a lot of labor in that, and the chemical cleaning could compromise things. So it's a lot of money, but unless we're going to replace boilers, which I don't think is a feasible thing to do at this point in time, we really need to spend the money. We can try to put some of our labor towards that to offset those costs, but it's something that the certified boiler company's got to do to satisfy L&I.
With the age of these boilers, what kind of maintenance annually are we anticipating?
So with this, so every year we do have them cleaned out by a company. We contract, this year was HSA got the bid. They do fireside cleaning, but there's normally not a waterside cleaning. L&I wants to inspect low water cutoffs and different things like that, your relief valves. They do that inspection, I believe, every 2 years. And almost every year, these boilers cost us thousands of dollars. This year's probably one of the worst. And it came up to the point of we needed to get the boilers on, is why he gave us a temporary so that we could get through this heating season. But he said, absolutely, you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z, or they're not getting passed for next year.
Anything useful in Hicken or Milford?
Explain about the hot water heater.
So domestic water heater for Quakertown Elementary, that failed, and we actually used the domestic water heater from Milford, which was only about 3 years old. And we took something the size of, a little bit larger than a car, and put a standard size in. It was about this diameter, about this high, which would serve the purpose there. For Quakertown Elementary, getting those boilers out, the physical footprint would be a challenge in itself to even replace them. It would be a big challenge to do that. Tican Valley, their boilers are probably over 10 or 12 years old as well. I'm not sure it would be a good idea to move them. Good idea, though.
I understand I'm asking you for a ballpark, so I'm not holding you to anything here, but what would it cost?
Annual?
No, to put in a brand new boiler, whatever you want to put in there. And again, I understand you're going to throw a number at me and it's just like that, but still.
150,000 for one.
And what do we need, two?
Do we have to? No, but everything we do in the district's redundant. So if a boiler fails, we have a backup that can go and run till the first one gets.
So ballpark $500,000 with the purchase and the installation, because it's going to be an installation and nightmare and a removal nightmare.
Right, and it's asbestos. Everything in there is going to compound the demolition of that as well.
$1 million.
For a school, we're apparently going to close
No problem.
for 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. For a school that has a limited use potential down the road.
So we're going to try to keep them operational as long as we need to. Okay.
Good news tonight, Mr. Harper?
Yes. Last item is a good news item. I wanted to finish out that way. So Upper Bucks Tech School, they're looking at doing some improvements for their animal technology program, and so they contacted school districts, Palisades, Penn Ridge, looking for surplus furniture, and we just so happen to have some items at Milford Middle School that they could use to help their program, and we are giving them what they need to help with this animal technology program.
That's good news. I'm happy to hear that.
That's all I have.
That was quite a lot, Mr. Harper. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, moving along. Discussion of upcoming action items. There's, under fiscal items, the Bucks County IU number 22 programs and services with an IMRS budget for 2018-2019. The board's going to be asked at our next meeting on February 22nd to approve the BCIU budget. Last year it was $57,047. It will be, this year's portion is $57,447. Last year's portion was $57,850, so it actually dropped a little bit. There is a report on board docs for anybody that wants to review the particulars on there. Okay, we'll move on to the public comment on the upcoming fiscal consent agenda. Does anybody have any public comment? No? Okay. Moving on to the fiscal consent agenda. First item is adoption of the preliminary budget for the 2018-2019 school year. The Business Services Department is requesting approval of the proposed budget for fiscal year 2018-19 with exceptions. 2018-19 proposed budget for fiscal year totals $111,354,978. This includes $800,000 in budgetary reserve. The proposed millage rate is 164.3923, an increase of 6.6261 mils, or 4.2% over the 2017-18 millage rate of 157.7662 mils. The proposed expenditures of $2,128,022 more than the 2017-18 budget, for an increase of 1.95%. And this will be a roll call vote. So, do we have any discussion?
Need a motion first.
Wait a minute.
Excuse me.
The other two items are gone from the fiscal consent agenda, correct?
Other two items?
You're asking for a
Yes.
fiscal consent agenda, which means you would.
There's going to be separate votes on the other two.
Well, I don't think the other two exist anymore if you take a look at them.
Well, the one we're still going to, I think, have a discussion on about,
Okay, but that's not a vote. Because we struck the thing down, it was just a
Okay.
direction, wasn't it? Wasn't it just direction? Because we're no longer soliciting an RFP, we're suggesting they prepare documents for a future.
right, which we've already done.
To my point, those two are no longer
Okay.
valid, from what I can tell.
Well, this is a roll call, and the others wouldn't be a roll call anyway.
So this is the fiscal consent agenda.
That's
Yes,
my
Mr.
point.
Jackson.
And this is just a preliminary budget, right?
This is the preliminary budget.
So we're not necessarily, if we can
Not
come
until
in
June.
under,
Not until
we're
June.
not.
This
it's-
is the absolute ceiling for the
Right,
budget.
right. I just wanted to understand that. Thank you.
The hope is that over the next 3 months, that coming back under Act 1 happens in this.
Okay.
But as you've seen, the very first numbers that come out each year are the numbers that the public thinks are the tax rate. So it doesn't matter, you could put negative 4% tax rate in June, and the only thing that the public will think is we raised taxes by 4-something%, so.
The optics on this aren't good, but.
Before we get
it's
too
not
far into the
necessarily
discussions, can we do the motion?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Good. Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Do I have a motion on the budget as stated, preliminary budget?
I'll motion.
Okay, Ms. Mitchell. Second,
I'll second.
Ms. Weed. Okay. Discussion. I think we just had that, actually.
Now, in the middle of the sentence I was in before.
Yeah, can you finish? That would be good, helpful.
So even though this isn't the final budget, what happens in June, the optics on it are bad.
Can
Because
you tell me more what you mean?
Well, because the backlash actually from even allowing exceptions to be on the table from the last meeting,
Right.
it's riled up some people in the community because they say the visceral reaction is that there they are raising taxes.
Yeah.
Even though it hasn't happened yet, the first steps for it to be possible beyond Act 1 are in play. And so when I talk about the optics, it's about the perception in the community about the board's willingness to increase taxes even more than the index that we've tried to stick to in the past. My position on Act 1 is the firm line, and the task that I'm going to try to work with our committee and the administration on is to make Act 1 happen, and the administration is still asking for this wiggle room. So, even though this isn't the final budget, we have until June to start, looking for areas to get cost savings, to better identify the revenues. Really we'll have the full picture in May before we go into that. Either way, it's not a budget that looks good, going with the index to a percentage of the community. Again, there's another group in the community that's going to be very pleased that the board is willing to pull out the checkbook to go for things that they perceive as needs. So that's basically where we're at. So we're not bound at this point for this budget, but
What is exactly the point of,
because
I'm confused.
because
Like, what's the point of this?
It's the
Is this
budgeting system of the
meaningless?
state, correct?
It basically, there's a sequence of events we have to go through each year. So we got our first look at it. Yeah, so basically, we got a first peek at it the other week, and the administration asked for exceptions. They said they didn't feel that they were going to be able to make ends meet without taking the exceptions, and we voted to allow them to include the exceptions into the budgeting. So this is the first look at the budget where they've, taken the next set of numbers from the last time, incorporated the index into it, and are moving forward as this is how much they have to spend. And so our task is to peel off as much of that as possible before June. The real budget isn't approved until then. But the point is that I expect there to be some complaint about.
Sure, when you have an article that says Quakertown eyes tax raises, that's pretty scary. I would be nervous about that too. But hopefully we can restore some confidence in the community by being very clear that we are doing everything possible to try to balance this without going that way. And if we're successful, then I think that will hopefully.
It's like I said at the last meeting, if the capacity to take exceptions exists, then it puts me in a position to be hyper vigilant over line items that much more carefully, and sets up the demeanor for going to next cycle next year. So we're again at a task to really look at the items much more closely, and go into programs and look for redundancies and efficiencies much more carefully even than we have before. Because, again, unforeseen expenses from, the budget that we had for 2 years ago for now didn't pan out because we got 2 large bills specifically from the PSERS and special eds increases that were not calculated with accuracy because, well, the numbers that come from Harrisburg, we don't know until they come.
Well, what about getting the, Gary's here, and he's a wonderful writer, to do responses? I read Melinda Rizzo's article, and she made it sound like taxes had been raised already in the intelligentsia, which is not accurate. No. That's an alternative fact. And so to use a phrase that's in our national equation here. And I think people need to be educated on the real facts. So what about doing a real fact article and what we actually voted for? And then the community will know.
Tried that for 3 years.
Can we, well?
Yeah, I mean, you need to keep trying.
I think you need to keep trying.
The system is rigged. The system is designed to be foolish, and we're just pawns. And I submit that the administration, is there anything new in this information that you want to call our attention to compared to the last time we saw a budget? Any like a miraculous, hey look, instead of this tiny sliver of the pie that we can deal with that actually wouldn't cover the delta anyway, there's nothing, is there anything new, like crazy differences?
Let me jump on that for a second. I'm not sure, the school district, for those people who don't believe we offer up enough information about things that are going on in our board meetings, I remind them that a lot of information is on the website if they care to look. And on the website right now, under the report tab, there's a whole big collection of budgetary items for 2018, 2019. And one of those is an expenditure report and a history of the expenditures of this district. It's just the expenditure side, not the revenue, mind you, but the 2017-18 budget, the administration asked for expenditures of $109 million. That's what is on that report. Yet they are estimating this year that they will actually have expenditures of $106 million. So last year's budget, this board approved expenditures of $3 million over what we actually are going to have to spend. So when we're talking about a budgetary item and the need to increase taxes, when we tell the community we need $109 million and we raise taxes accordingly, and then we find out that we only raised it $106 million, the question is, where is the discrepancy? And I'll pose that to the administration.
Thank you for telling me ahead of time that you were going to ask the question, so we have a very accurate answer. Mr. Schock, would you answer?
I can answer that. The attachment H that you're referring to, the expenditure report, which has our historical actual numbers, and then the 17-18 budget, is a little misleading, I guess I'll say. And the reason I'm saying that is the budget number there was actually the official budget prior to closing Milford. So if you recall last year, the vote on Milford happened in the summer, and by law we have to have our budget finalized and out in June. And because the vote didn't happen, we had to build the budget as if it were still in the inventory and the staff were still in the inventory. So it is a little artificially inflated because of that. There's also another attachment, which is V, which shows a better picture. let's say the vote would have happened before, we could have built that into the budget. We would have budgeted just over $108 million, which would have been the difference, the savings from closing Milford Middle School.
My favorite diagram is W, just so that, more meaningless letters for everyone, but W is my favorite because it really shows 10% of the budget is discretionary. The rest is fixed.
Right.
Good luck squeezing that rock. There's nothing to squeeze.
It's rigged.
It's rigged. Well, it's not rigged. It's just, contractual obligations. Debt,
Mr. Jackson, to answer your question.
Yeah, so it seems to me the answer to the question is we had to prepare the budget as if Milford was not closing because we could not assume the vote that had not yet happened. Therefore, the costs were were heavily inflated to what they turned out to be.
That's correct, yeah. And if you, and I can pull it and put it up on the website, the original budget, I can put that up there. I think that was stating we were going to end up using $4.3 million of fund balance at that time. And the current estimate is more like 1.5, 1.6 million. So we cut into that because of the closure of Milford Middle School.
The reality is we don't really get a lot of surprises. This $1 million that we're trying to work into the capital budget to cover unforeseens is less than 1% of the budget. And the number that's come out in June, and if you recall the histogram I pulled out at the last meeting, shows the preliminary budget meeting, how much was able to be taken off of that because there's a lot of wish list items that start out, the staffing is a little overrepresented, and so the number will come down. I'm certain of that because it always has. But if you look back even prior to Dr. Harner, going back to 2012, that final June number and the actual expenditures of the district generally are within 1%. Basically we come in within $1 million. So the budgeting that's done, the final budget in June will likely very accurately within a span of several $100,000 reflect the expenses that are going to be used next year. The task now comes, not to debating the accuracy of the forecasting, but bringing down that final number by the June vote so that the number that's accurate is a lower number, and that's where the Finance Committee comes into task with working with the administration. That's basically it.
Okay, so I think it's time to vote on the preliminary.
One more thing, if I may.
Yes.
I apologize, but I do want to read something. This is my own words, and I apologize, but it's going to be critical of some board members, so please let me get through it before comments are addressed back. The following information is available on the district website. The previous board has increased taxes at or below the Act 1 index for past 7 years. Each of those years increase being less than 3%. In the preceding 19 years, taxes were increased in excess of 3% in 14 of those 19 years. So frankly, I believe the previous board has demonstrated to this community its belief in fiscal responsibility. Last year, the board again refused to approve exceptions and forced the administration to find still another solution to its ever-increasing costs. The solution offered was to close 2 schools and cut other programs. The board agreed with the administration's recommendations. The community did not agree, and for that reason, there are now 4 new board members. One of the contentions that the candidates offered was that the position of the former board that we were facing continuously increasing costs we could no longer control was in fact untrue, that there really was no budget crisis. So as we consider today whether or not to approve a preliminary budget that permits a 4.2% tax increase, which would be the largest in the last 8 years, I would ask the new board members to explain to the public why there's such a need if the previous board was incorrect. If the previous board took unnecessary actions to reduce costs, then today we should be in a position where a 0% tax increase is possible, or at least maintain our tradition of simply raising taxes to the Act 1 minimum. It may be that the new board members are simply asking to pass this preliminary budget with its 4.2% increase possible to permit them as new board members to more deeply review the financial issues facing the district, which is a fair point. And frankly, it's one of the reasons I also voted with them to allow them that time to look at the numbers. But if the final budget results in a tax increase above the Act 1 limits, or even if the final budget increases taxes at Act 1, and that budget gets approved by the new board members, then I believe that they would owe an apology to the previous board for their characterization of the intents of their previous actions. My words.
I don't quite understand where you're going with this. I'm not sure. I apologize to the audience to have to listen to that because I feel, I don't know what productive is going to come out of that. I think at the, well, at the end of the day, right, I think what we're trying to do is take a look at, yes, where we are currently with the numbers. And I'm glad that we're hyper-analyzing the numbers. If that's what's to come out of this, then I think that's great. And that's all I'll say.
So I'll just say that my biggest thing was, with spending. And if you continue to spend money, you're going to continue to owe money. And so when a financial crisis was looming, and I've said to you, Mr. Jackson, on multiple occasions, that I don't know that I would have made a different decision than you guys made. But what I do know is that I wouldn't have spent $3.5 million on an athletic complex given the fact that we were facing financial challenges. Amen. I did say it. And I wouldn't spend more money until I understood what the finances look like. Because if at home I didn't have that money, I would stop spending money. I wouldn't continue to go out and buy the next great thing. So I often said that I didn't know what I would have done. I may have agreed with you guys had I been sitting on this. And when we had the conversation, I said that. But I also said that I would stop spending money.
Right.
Which you didn't.
Now's your chance.
And so I said, and when faced with the question 2 weeks ago that we voted on about Act 1, my only question was, if we don't make that decision tonight, does it affect us at all? And the answer was no. We will still have time to digest it. So that's my field. My field is, sometimes things happen emergently, and you have to make a split-second decision, and other times you have a little bit of time to make the decision. And that's what I voted on. I didn't vote on increasing taxes. I voted on giving us time.
Correct.
To further digest that if we are, as a community, faced with eliminating a program or raising taxes a little bit, that we have that option on the table. And if the option is we eliminate a program and we don't raise taxes, then that's what we do. But we don't even know what that looks like. These mandates of budgeting that are put in front of boards are simply to pair philosophies against one another. And it doesn't do anybody any good when you can't really analyze the spending that you're about to approve. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're asking. And I think that was the only thing I voted for. And while the optics may be glaring, your comments perpetuate that.
Correct.
So let's do our due diligence. And I agree with Dr. Seneca that I would love to see us not go above Act 1 index. And I would love to see where the redundancy is and look at everything from the top to the bottom. Healthcare is facing a crisis that we're doing that today in healthcare, where we got real fat at the top on healthcare, and they're eliminating those positions. And so we need to be diligent in what we do. But again, we put a lot of stress on the back of the teachers. We heard tonight a presentation. We don't know what we don't know yet. So let's keep digging and get to a point where we can make an educated decision, and not one simply out of your gut and your philosophy on whether you think taxes should be raised or not. The fair thing is that you've raised taxes, and we may continue to raise taxes every year. I have no idea, but we need to dig a little deeper into this and understand it a little bit more before educated people can make a decision on it.
And there's a long-term strategy here. I think the goal of the new board members was, yes, the spending that has happened and occurred in the past, we don't feel in some ways was responsible. So we have such a small amount of money per some of the board members that we have control over. So let's make sure we're utilizing that. And I appreciate that there is now a facilities plan in place, but the reality is, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but that was lacking for a long time. So we need to look at this thing from top to bottom to see what makes sense for us to, over time, and as a long term, right, make the right decisions and look and analyze and not leave any stone unturned, as someone mentioned, and also leave all of our options on the table. So we haven't even had time to go through each of those individual items, and we hope to do so. And I'm really hoping that, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm just perseverating on 90% of the budget is off limits. Don't know where you're thinking you're going to look, but don't look at all 100% of the items. Just please look at the 10% and figure out how much Xerox paper you can cut.
Well, there's also other programs, though, that we plan on taking a look at to see.
Sports.
No, we're not, that's not what we're saying. We're saying we want to look at the effectiveness and the way that we're spending in certain programs and the success of those programs. There's a lot of things to analyze here. Some of them possibly even sensitive, programs that are very meaningful to myself and the community as well. So I don't know that it's fair to say that we are only going to be looking at that 10%, because we are looking at other things outside of that 10% to make sure we're, effectively running this business, essentially.
When will we get a glimpse of what the opportunity is to look at?
Every couple weeks until June, basically. And so, in deference, the thing is, having 4 new board members changes the character of the board. It's not just like having 1 or 2. And so I appreciate and deference, the part of me that's not voting, the desire to have that wiggle room, because then it's an opportunity to take a broader look at everything that is possible going through a budget cycle. And what I'm hoping is that after going through it and seeing how we come up to the final number that we end up with in June, that the rest of you will come back and join me next year in having that line in the sand about working with a budget that is on the skinnier side from the get-go. But I absolutely understand and again, like I said last time, I'm not going to have, I'm not going to be mad about having the exceptions be on the table through the process, because it gives a greater opportunity to see all that can be. But still, the goal is going to be to not utilize them, and hopefully, if we don't have to, then we'll go back to not taking our exceptions.
I just have to add philosophically, as one of the new board members here, I know what the tax base here is in Quakertown, and I can tell you my husband and I pay at the very highest end of those taxes. So I am willing, we bought at the top of the market where we live in 2006, and I think it is so important. My daughter's been in this public school system. She goes to the public school. She's been in the public school here since she was in first grade, and she's now a senior in the high school. And I ran for the board and am on this board because I feel public education is so important, and I am willing to pay an extra 1% in taxes philosophically in order to keep our school district good and improve it. And the administration asked for that, for exceptions. And I think it was recognized 2 weeks ago that Dr. Harner has squeezed as much orange or juice out of the orange as he can. And we need to look at that. And that's why I voted the way I did. And I think it's important that the community understands that. And, I'm not running for national office or Congress. I'm here because I care about the school district. And, I'm already at the top of the tax bracket in this community, an extra 1% over 2.8. I am willing to pay.
I have a quick question. Maybe this is a topic for another time, or maybe I'll just state this, and you can let me know if you can give me more information at a later time. Do we have protections, and I think it's outside of our control, but are there any protections in place for low-income protections from soaring property taxes, or there's no such thing?
If you recall, at the last election cycle, there was an amendment made to the Constitution about that.
No, I know that, but I'm saying just the way that the system is now, do they offer any, like, relief based on that, based on low income? Or is it just everybody pays this percentage the same, there's no relief whatsoever?
It's all based on the assessment of the home you live in. There are no credits based on your income as far as real estate taxes. There are rebates related to gambling proceeds, but nothing intrinsically related to income.
That's my question.
And
Thank
if you
you.
own property, you got to pay to play.
Yeah.
And the last time the assessment was done, Mr. Garden?
My gosh, 1970s.
Yeah, I know people here that have older homes, and they have much bigger homes even than my husband and I do. And we moved here in 2006, so we have new construction, and they are paying for homes that are worth twice as much as mine on 10 acres, just to throw this out there to the public. They are paying less than 50% of what my husband and I pay in taxes, because their taxes have not been reassessed. So I think the public should keep that in mind. Those of you on big farms that you've inherited, or that you have a lot of land that you've had for 30 or 40 years, you're paying a lot less. You are. You're paying a lot less than new construction. You are.
Is there any plan, not that I'm for or against, when do they do reassessments? Is that ever something that
Commissioners have to approve.
the commissioners have to approve that? Okay.
Yeah.
They will not.
Okay.
I mean, 1971, think what the property values were then compared to 40 years, 45 years later to those of us who moved in the mid-2000s. So keep that in mind. What?
Houses are 40 years older.
They're still increased in value a lot in 40 years. So yes, they have, ma'am.
85 years old, living by yourself.
Okay, I
She
think,
is 85 years old, people, on a fixed income. Where is she going to live when all of her income goes to your tax budget?
For the record, I've heard this story many times, knocking doors, talking to senior citizens. I know this is painful, right? And so we should all be mindful. I think we all are
It's not painful.
mindful.
It's reality.
Right.
It's reality. You just keep talking about yourself. Okay, think about
order, please. I think it's time we have the vote.
I would just like to correct the record on one last thing for Mr. Jackson, because he's sadly mistaken. We never campaigned blaming you for raising taxes. However, individuals that were running against us decided to fabricate some sort of false reality that we were getting elected in order to raise taxes. We had to point out to everybody that they did raise taxes when they were in this seat. And that is what was communicated. So I hope that helps correct your record.
Sure, it took the pressure off of him being criticized recently for his vote, so I hope it was worth that.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, Madam Secretary. This will be a roll call vote. Again, this is the vote on the preliminary budget.
Mr. Akmanovitz?
So this that we're voting on right now,
It's not the actual budget.
it's not the actual.
It's kind of, it seems silly. It's just like, is this like,
I mean, it's including these exceptions that I don't want to vote for the record.
But you did, last time.
No.
see,
No.
we didn't.
What's that?
Then vote no.
No vote no. Well, what would be the consequence of us all voting no? Can someone?
You're going to have to keep voting till you get to a preliminary budget, whatever the number is.
This evening.
Maybe I can explain it. So, what we did last time, again, it's a kabuki.
Is it formality?
It's a stupid formality, that the state puts on us before we have all the numbers, and all we're doing is, it's like a ratchet. So we agreed last time to leave the ratchet up at a high level. Go ahead, knock yourself out. You don't need to get to Act 1. For some reason, people think that that's going to make them have different decisions, but I don't. So all we're talking about here is if you say, no, we want to stick to Act 1, you tighten the ratchet. The process says you can never loosen the ratchet again. So we're basically capping the administration. Last time we did that, we said you can take exceptions and ask for more tax money.
But there's oversight. There's oversight. It's not just, and I believe the people on this finance committee are committed to analyzing this in detail, right?
Once the budget's passed,
So-
no matter what you do.
Right, we're not passing a budget right now,
Correct. But
This is not the final budget, this is just the preliminary.
The thing that's confounding, one, because it's a perfunctory measure we have to go through, is that we don't actually, we don't even know what our income is until May. And so it's interesting, it's like shopping for a house and finding a house you like and getting approved for a mortgage and the payment before you've found out what your income is. And so it's kind of backward.
But there's no spending going to occur, correct?
No spending is on the hook as a result
So
of
this
this.
is just silly dance.
It's a frustrating thing we go through, and what it does is it sets a tone for the administration and lining their ducks up for next year, and it puts them on task to have a starting point for working toward the June date. It's essentially irrelevant except for the fact that whatever the upper end is the upper end. It establishes the ceiling.
If you lower it, you can never raise it, that's all.
This is the worst-case scenario right now.
This is the worst-case scenario.
Right,
Yes.
so what we're saying is, worst-case scenario, this is the budget.
This is the worst-case
Say
scenario.
yes. They go back and say, okay, they keep digging and digging and digging. And then the finance committee's challenged with finding.
If this is the scenario, I won't go down quietly.
We vote on the final budget in June, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is early on in the process. This is the preliminary budget. Legally, we have to vote on it and pass one by tonight. just
Why
so
would anyone
everybody knows.
vote no?
Because I don't think we should raise taxes. So that's why I will.
Right, but
Yeah, I mean, you've already lost.
Okay, let's continue with the vote.
I don't get it
I believe
very
the vote
much.
is to Mr. Akmanowitz.
I reluctantly vote yes.
Ms. Weed?
I'm voting yes.
Ms. Mitchell?
I'm not really sure the point of this, but I will vote yes.
Mr. McCucci?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
No.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
Mr. Kern?
No.
Dr. Sedekum?
No.
President Klein?
No.
Motion passed 5-4.
Okay, we have a preliminary budget.
It just means we haven't squeezed the administration down.
I still agree with what I said 2 weeks ago. Dr. Harner?
Yes, sir, I remember it
Thank
like
you.
it was a moment ago.
Act 1, thank you.
Well, I agree with that too, but you said you needed wiggle room. So,
Yes, ma'am.
you know,
What,
that's the point, and that's what the public needs to understand.
I think, though, that we know the first budget is always going to be like the worst case, right? So I think what we need to understand is what the gravity of a decision that we would have to make down the road, like, for instance, close another school, cut teachers, we need to be able to have all these facts before we decide. And I have confidence we're not going to have to do any of that, so maybe I'm just being too optimistic.
Okay.
Great book called Hope is Not a Strategy.
I don't know if I want to sit next to him anymore because other than his funny jokes at times, he's really pessimistic and he's draining me over
I'm
here.
better when we're done with the budget.
Let's move on to the information items.
Why do you think I didn't move?
See, you put me here on purpose. Oh,
That's my
gosh.
daughter you're talking about.
How's that effect on people?
She just got into
Oh,
tubs.
American Eagle Used Clothing Company who are recycling specialists, will place a used clothing recycling bin on our property to collect unwanted clothing and shoes. There's a document on board docs if you want more details on that.
What property?
I believe
Up front.
it's in the document here.
Commerce Drive.
Is that what that says?
Yes,
Okay.
Commerce Drive. I'm sorry?
Who's working with this contractor? And why are we going to give them exclusive rights to be the only ones to put a bin out there? I would not vote to have that. I want that struck.
Under the,
Located in the 6th grade center parking lot, not 100.
is it just that you're saying that maybe there's a better suited vendor for this type of?
No, I don't see why we should give any one company exclusive rights to get our students donated material or their families donated.
I don't believe there's anything in there that says it is
I
exclusive.
think there is. Page 2.
There is?
I think
Okay.
if we put, if anyone puts in it, they collect what comes out of the container.
No, American Eagle has exclusive rights and is the only company authorized to serve as clothing recycling bin.
Oh, I see.
Isn't there enough around Quakertown already for that sort of thing?
There's a lot.
And send all your young children's shoes to my house, because we bring those to Guatemala that are like gently used to the orphanage.
So am I hearing that there's not a desire to do this information item?
Exclusively, what Mr. Iconic was.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's troubling.
I don't know why we need it on the school property. Aren't there plenty of, I mean, what's the genesis behind it?
We can easily say no.
I'd love to say yes, I just don't want to give them exclusive rights. I mean,
That's a sticking point.
Apparently, there's nobody else beating down our doors to do it other than them, so I'm not sure why it matters.
Should we get an RFP for clothing drives?
Oh, man.
I need to make a,
I'm not going to block this, so.
Well, it's just that wording. That's all that we,
how long is it good for, how long, is this a time thing? Is it like a year? So you want to give it a year and see if it works
You'll drive by the
out?
parking lot and see one of those boxes that people can pull up and throw stuff in, like the other 72 boxes around Quakertown community.
it might be nice just because people are visiting that area to convenience, but I see what you're saying.
It does say that they'll keep the area clean, which is probably why they wouldn't be the only one.
Do you get money for this? Do we get money for it?
No, they
No, the only reason I ask is because I know
American
that my
Eagle.
daughter's going on this trip, and they collected like 7,000 pounds of clothing, and
They get money, yeah.
they got money for it. And it was just, stuff that. so I-
Mr. Harper, can we revisit this in a year after the initial and see if it's been a problem or, if there's any other issues surrounding it?
I mean, Mr. Harper, do we think it's a good idea?
It seems like a goodwill thing.
Okay.
I handed it to him.
I see, yeah.
It came in to me.
I was going to ask you next.
Thank you, sir.
But, yeah, if you think
I
it's,
think it is, helping others is always a good idea. I figured it doesn't cost us anything, and it's a one-year retainer or whatever, 1 year renewable.
We'll revisit in a year.
Thank.
Okay, moving on. The RFP for food services has gone out, and the QCSD union and management are working collaboratively at the consortium level on district wellness initiatives. There is an article attached to board docs if you would like to read more.
It is the one that I sent you last week about Anita England.
The suspension report for January is on board docs if you wish to review that. And again, a reminder that updates to the board briefing book are located under the library tab in board docs. Okay, moving on to communications. I do not believe there's any communication item this month. Is there?
Correct.
Okay. New business. Do any board members have new business they would wish to bring up at this point? Okay, which moves us to the last public comment of the evening. Is there anybody that would like to comment? Okay.
Can I just say, this is just something I wanted to point out. I went with my kids to the Alice in Wonderland musical that was put on by directors Karen Quinn and Marcia Vanderslice, and it was phenomenal. The kids did a magnificent job. It was over 100 kids, I think, 120 coordinated. It was, I mean, it's hard to keep my 3-year-old's attention, but the whole time he was really enjoying it. We sat in the back though, so that we knew he's going to melt down any second. We're out of there, you know. But it was just a great performance. So I just want to recognize those directors and those kids that did such a great job.
Thank you.
I'll pass it on. It was a great show. I was very thankful I got to go. Take my family, who also enjoyed it very much.
Okay, dates for board members and their calendars. Thursday, February 22nd, there will be a policy meeting in the Board Caucus Conference Room number 3 here at the DSC. That's at 5:45. At 6, there will be a Finance Committee meeting, Community Room A here at the DSC, and then followed at 7 by the regular voting meeting here in the Community Room at the DSC.